How do you find your proper squat stance? Should it be wide? Should it be narrow? Let's chat about it.
Don't you want to look good naked?
Finding your proper squat stance is going to be dependent on you and your personal structure. So there are 2 different tests that I like to implement for my clients. And before I go into the tests, I definitely want to just make sure I mention that this might change over time, especially as you progress, as you get more advanced, as you start to lift heavier. You might find that a squat stance that worked for you when you were first starting to squat may be slightly different as you continue to advance and try out, different types of squats and things like that, whether you're adding squats in to bias your quads or your glutes. So there's a little bit more that goes into it with that. But in general, when you're trying to find your proper squat stance, I like to do 2 things. So the first thing is testing your personal active range of hip flexion. So what you're gonna do with this is basically stand on both legs, hold on to something stable, a bench, a table, anything, your dog, maybe that's not that stable, but anything stable that you can find, and lift up your right leg straight in front of you as high as you can, and then bring it out to the side and lift it up a little bit more. You should get a little bit more range of motion there once you turn your leg out to the side. And then I want you to just put your foot right back down on the floor just from that position and see where it lands. And you can look down, and for me, the way that my foot is angled, it's pretty out to the side there. So my toes, when I squat, I have them not straight ahead, I have them out to the side a little bit. That's just how my personal structure is built. So I'm gonna follow that. And then you wanna do the same thing with your other leg by just matching the other leg. So you can either hold on to something on your other side and pull your leg up and do the same thing, pull it all the way up to your chest, move it out to the side a little bit. You should get a little bit more range there, and then put that foot back on the ground and see where your feet line up. So that's one way to kind of find, okay, where am I starting with, first of all, my toes, which direction are they pointing in? So that's a really good test to see, should my toes be pointing forward? Should they be pointing out a little bit? That's all gonna be determined by your personal anatomy. So that's a great test to find that. So the second test is gonna be the power stance test. So this is gonna allow you to get a little bit better idea of the width, so how narrow or wide you wanna go for your personal structure. So all you have to do is get in a jumping stance, a power stance, jump up, and land in what we call that power stance, which is just your knees bent and kind of in that like semi-squat position, and see where you land, see where your feet land. That is naturally gonna show you kind of around where that stance should be. And that's gonna help you to assess and just give you a starting place to work from. So that might not be the exact squat stance that you wanna use once you put a barbell on your back, but it should give you a place to start. And then you can make little adjustments depending on what feels good for you once you have, the bar on your back or you have dumbbells in your hand, whatever it may be. Something else to note is that if you're a female, you might notice that your stance is a little bit wider compared to a male. And the reason for that is because females tend to have a little bit of a wider pelvis structure. So just in general, and this is not always the case for everyone, but in general, females tend to have a little bit of a wider squat stance than males, just because the way that our pelvises are structured. So once you do those 2 tests to kind of assess where your starting place is for your squat stance, you wanna, again, adjust how you're feeling with that and test things out. The reason why we don't wanna be too wide or too narrow is because if we're too wide, it actually can limit our range of motion and our stability, and also our ability to get enough output from either our quads or our glutes, depending on what we're trying to bias, specifically if our goal is to build muscle. A lot of people have heard that you should go wider if you're trying to target your glutes, and you should go narrower if you're trying to target your quads. It doesn't necessarily work like that. For some people, they might find that their wider stance does allow them to get a little bit more glutes. However, it's not necessarily universal where everybody should be wider to target their glutes and narrow to target their quads. We actually tend to see that sometimes the narrower squat can recruit more glutes versus the wider squat. So it's something to pay attention to. Setting yourself up in terms of what your main goal is gonna be important. So if your main goal is to bias your glutes, making sure that you have proper setup and technique for that If your main goal is to bias your quads a little bit more, making sure that you're paying attention to that. But that's gonna be a different video. If you wanna learn more about that, check out that video, which is the different ways to bias your glutes versus your quads with your squat. In this video, we're gonna stick to the stance. So I'm gonna get back to that. Again, too wide can limit your output, can limit your range of motion and your stability, and too narrow can actually do the same thing. You might feel a little bit more unstable as you come down in your squat. You might not be able to get as much range of motion. So again, implement those two tests to see where your starting point is for your squat stance and then go from there.